Alright, let's talk some more about Stoicism. Sorry, we were going over the moral letters by Lucius and Seneca. We have landed finally after 3 separate sets of videos, or videos I should say, on letter 81. We have now landed on letter 82. And once again, Seneca is talking about, it starts off with some death stuff, but and then fortune, and you can't control fortune. I found this paragraph to be very interesting. So let's keep our distance from fortune as much as we can. But the only way we can do that is through an understanding of ourselves and of nature. Let us know where we are headed and where we come from, what is good for us and what is bad, what to pursue and what to avoid, what reason is, which distinguishes objects of pursuit and avoidance, soothes the madness of our desires, checks the savagery of our fears. Some think they have overcome these forces even without philosophy, but when their tranquility is put to the test by some misfortune, the confession is wrung from them at last. The brave words die on their lips when the torturer says, "Stretch out your hand," and death comes near. Now one can say to them, "It was easy for you to scoff at suffering before you had to face it. Here now is pain, which you said is endurable. Here now is death, which you decried in such a fine long speech. The whips are cracking. The sword is flashing. Now is the time, Aeneas, for your courage. Now is the time for your stout heart. What will give you that stout heart is constant practice, rehearsing not your speeches, but your mind, and preparing yourself for death. He who has tried to use tricks of logic to persuade you that death is not an evil has neither encouraged you nor roused your spirit." I find this very interesting. He goes on talking about death again, but we've talked about a lot of death in these videos, so I thought we would try to avoid that a little bit today. What Seneca brings up, I think, is an interesting and vital aspect of Stoicism. Namely, there is talking the talk, and then there is walking the walk. And as always, talking the talk is a lot easier than walking the walk. Now, this is not a bit of semantics, but this is real. This is a real effect. And I have found myself, and maybe if you've really tried to apply Stoic principles to your life, it's very easy to quote the Stoics and talk about what people should do, what you should do when everything is going well. But when things are more difficult, when things are harder, then it becomes all the more necessary to actually apply those Stoic principles. But that is when it is hardest to do so. If everything in your life is going well, it's easy to say, "Oh, some things are within your control, but other things are not within your control." Rates, this is fairly simple, but it's much harder to do that. That was Dutch, by the way, so don't worry about it. It's much harder to do that sort of thing when things are not going well in your life, right? Because then it's tempting to say, you feel down, and because you feel down, it is hard to see that whatever is happening to you is not within your control, or that it's something that you may have to take a step back from so that you can really think about whatever it is that's happening. Take that mental step back, calm down, then respond, these sorts of things. That is easy to do when there is nothing bad happening. That is much harder to do when everything is collapsing around you, so to speak. And that, I think, is something that people often, I don't want to say forget about, but that we really need to keep practicing. You have to keep doing that, because that's the answer. How do you prepare yourself to be able to practice principles like these when the time comes, when something is actually difficult. How will you do that then? What will you do then? How will you take care of things? How will you take things into account? That's hard. And Seneca puts this quite nicely here, I think. Let us know where we are headed and where we come from, what is good for us and what is bad, what to pursue and what to avoid, what reason is, which distinguishes objects of pursuit and avoidance, soothes the madness of our desires, checks the savagery of our fears. Exploring reason is important. And this philosophy, Stoic philosophy, is a very rational philosophy. That does not mean, I've said this a lot of times and I will say this again, that does not mean that Stoicism is about extirpating your emotions, never having emotions again, not experiencing emotions, never being angry, never being sad. That's not what Stoicism is about. What it is about is learning to manage, I'm not necessarily saying control, but learning to manage those emotions in such a way that they harm you less. That you don't get so angry that you ruin your whole day, or so frustrated that you lash out at someone which you then later regret. And yes, we will slip up and we will make mistakes, so we'll do all these things, but that principally is what Stoicism is about, learning to control those feelings. And how do you control those emotions? Through ratio, through thinking, right? Through cognition, taking a step back, having a good old think about things. That really matters. And you do that through practice. Seneca says this, right? Know where we are headed and where we come from. Think about what will come on your path, might happen to you. Think about how you're going to handle that. There is nothing wrong, I think, with once in a while having a sit down with yourself and saying, what would happen if I were to lose my job next month? What would happen if I would fall really pretty ill? How do I feel about death? How do I feel about dying? These are not easy conversations to have with yourself, which is, to some people, that's a little weird, but I do it all the time. I think it's a very wise thought. So, know where you're going. Hopefully everything will be well, but you don't know that. But also know where you come from. It's also very good, I think, to think about what have I been through in life. And maybe you've had a very a carefree life. Maybe you've not really experienced anything. Well, at some point, there's probably going to be something that will be a concerning thing, that there is no life without worries or concerns. So thinking about it now, thinking about how you would handle a situation as it comes up, can be helpful and beneficial should that situation ever arise. Hopefully it won't, but you don't know that because that's out of your control. I also like this, so it's really thinking, right? What is good for us and what is bad, what to pursue and what to avoid. So think about these things. Deep down, you know what the right thing to do is. I would say 9 out of 10 times, it's very obvious what the right thing to do is. And sometimes choices are more complicated and more of a gray area, whatever. But in a lot of things, a lot of choices we make, that's an important consideration. What is the right thing to do, right? And often, again, it's fairly simple. You also know, as a result of that, what is typically the wrong thing to do. And I'm not necessarily saying it's easy to see the future and the outcomes of all your decisions, but you know that certain decisions are morally wrong. If you have the choice, you're talking to a colleague, and you have the choice of gossiping about another colleague or talking about the weather, so to speak, you know that talking about the weather is the virtuous thing to do and gossiping about a colleague is not a virtuous thing to do. You know this, and yet me too, you go for one thing and not the other, right? And that takes practice. It takes thought, thinking through what you are doing, why you are doing those things. So I like what Seneca says here, right? What reason is, what distinguishes objects of pursuit and avoidance, know what to go after, what not to go after, soothes the madness of our desires. You can't always act upon your desires. It is really tempting to go out and finish the 5 bars of chocolate. It's not good for you. You shouldn't do that thing, right? And that's a silly example, but you understand this also applies to moral transgressions, for example. soothes the madness of our desires, checks the savagery of our fears. Our fears can be savage. It's a beautiful way to put it. It can be savage. It can be very difficult to overcome fears because they can be very all-encompassing. They can be very all-encompassing. That's the best word. I don't know how else to put that. So they can take over your thoughts. And remember, again, Stoicism is a very rational philosophy. It's about taking a step back at that point and saying, wait a minute, is this a good fear to have? Is this reasonable? Is this something that I should fear? And sometimes the answer is yes. But very often in life, the answer is no. No, this is actually not a sensible fear to have. I don't even know if this is going to happen. What's the point in me being anxious about it now? And now someone's going to say, oh, but just now you said you should think about things that could happen. That's right. And then not be paralyzed by them, but think about them in advance so that if they arise, you may have a better handle on that situation. It might be easier for you to handle that, right? So, I'm trying to control the flickering of the camera with my mind. Dark. Light. Dark. Light. Okay. Food for thought. Things to think about how to approach that. And remember the importance of reason, rational reason. We forget about it, especially in times where things are hard for us, where we struggle with emotions, where we struggle with bad things happening to us. But that is where we need that reason the most. And the only way to be able to use it at that time is to practice it at an easier time. Okay, this is a small thing. Someone cut me off in traffic. I'm a little annoyed by that. Step back. This is not worth getting upset about. And I'm not trying to lecture. Like this is difficult for me too. But I do find the more I practice it, the easier it becomes. And then I do find that if I find myself in a situation again and again, it becomes easier to deal with and say, okay, that was stupid person. Forget about it. That's all right. It matters. So that's it for this week. Let me know what you think. Let me know how you practice rationality and how you apply these principles to your life. Hope this was useful, and I'll gladly see you again next week for more talk about Stoicism.